Hi, it's Tom from the Orange Jungle Tree Sheep, and welcome to another video. And today, I'm going to be giving you my thoughts and reviews on everything in the MCU, Phase 1. I'm going to be going through this phase by phase, starting with this, then just moving on in the future. Obviously, right now, we're just nearing the end of Phase 4. We still have a few more things to come out this year. So until then, I'm going to be phases 1 through 3 and other content. So let's get straight into it. First off, what is my process for coming up with these reviews? Well, I actually have a formula of sorts, or at least just some questions I was trying to ask. And each question that I was asking has a point value, which the maximum points all add up to 10. And obviously, I wrote down what I thought about it, give it a grade of points and out of 10. I'll go through these questions right now. First off, for 1.5 points, how well is it made? Looking at the writing of a movie, the acting, the cinematography, stuff like that. For 3 points, what type of entertainment is it? What type of experience is this movie trying to offer? Does it live up to that experience? Is that experience necessary for understanding the character well? Is it impactful? Is it unique? For 2.5 points, how did it adapt to the source material? I'm not looking at how well it adapted the source material, I'm just looking at how it did it. Because for some movies, some things here, a straight adaptation of the source material works. Sometimes, if it changes it, it works. I'm not looking at it doesn't have to adapt the source material one to one. Whatever adaptation it does or doesn't do, I'm just looking at, does it work? Does it take the source material in an interesting new direction or restate it in a way that's interesting? 1 point, or how did it do in objective metrics? This is the least important because honestly, it's mostly just performance, box office, critical response, that kind of stuff. That is potentially important for understanding how a movie does. Not quite as much as anything else, because honestly, there are lots of films that perform really well that are very good. There are lots of films that don't perform well that are very good. I just figured I'd include it just for the sake of it. And then for the final 2 points, how was it overall, and how did I enjoy it? Really just a general verdict and my personal takeaways and impressions of it. There's actually one last category that I'm giving that isn't quite as much of a direct thing to the reviews, but it is still important. I am ranking essentially the volume of the flaws of whatever the project is, and I'm assigning it a color: blue, green, yellow, orange, red, with blue being the best, red being the worst. I'm using it to really just bring up any issues that are still present, or honestly anything that, like, if the rating doesn't really fit my thoughts on the movie, like the rating out of 10, that's usually just there to really show a slightly more accurate vision of how I think of it. So let's get straight into it, honestly. And per the poll I took, I'm going to be giving my thoughts first and then my rating. Starting off, Iron Man. Oh boy, this movie. I don't even have to. I'm already gonna break my formula. 10 out of 10 straight up. It's amazing. Not only did it set off and provide a huge stepping off point for everything that came afterwards. It's just an awesome movie in its own right. 1.5 points for production quality. It still looks incredible for a 2008 movie, honestly. Robert Downey Jr.'s performance is awesome. Jeff Bridges as Obadiah Stane is really good. All the other performances beside it are good as well, but those main two are just very, very good. The story makes sense. It's satisfying. It's a good movie. You can tell there's a ton of heart put into this movie to make a good superhero movie that stands up to anything else that had come before, and to really make superhero movies interesting again, giving it 3 points for entertainment potential. It tries to be an interesting superhero origin movie. with military related action and touching on issues at the time, with weapons manufacturing and powerful corporations. And it does that perfectly. It's an experience all the way through that stays entertaining, and it delivers on that core goal, and that's exactly what is needed. Giving it 2.5 points for adaptation of the source material. And here's something you actually might not know if you're not quite as big of a comic fan. Iron Man's origin was actually originally tied to the Vietnam War. He was, in his original origin, written by Stan Lee, it was involving him inspecting weapons for the Vietnam War, and then he gets captured by terrorists and has to build a suit to escape. But I forget exactly what year it was. Honestly, it might have been mid 2000s or 90s. I think it was 2000s, I believe, where Tony Stark's origin is actually updated to be the conflict in Afghanistan. It's basically just the exact same thing, just a different conflict. He is doing a demonstration or inspecting weapons, gets captured by terrorists, gets wounded, builds a suit to escape. And it relies on the updated origin story, makes it very interesting. Definitely sells the appeal of the character. And it really shows, just watching this movie, you can see why Iron Man honestly went from a B-list Marvel character to being pretty much just the face of current Marvel today. Because pre-Iron Man, pre the movie, Tony Stark was a not very, but he was a B-list Marvel character. He just wasn't important, as honestly the most popular Marvel characters throughout time have honestly just been Spider-Man and the X-Men. This movie made Iron Man awesome, and it made Iron Man just so interesting. 1 point for objective metrics. Obviously, huge success, launched the whole series, still beloved all these years later. 2 points for overall quality and personal enjoyment. It's an awesome ride all the way through. It's really gripping, retains my focus, doesn't get boring or stale. And for flaws, I'm giving it a blue rating. No contest, they practically don't exist. You will have to try really hard to find people actively saying there's bad things about Iron Man, and even if they do, it's so minor. So that means Iron Man, 10 out of 10, blue. Next up, The Incredible Hulk. This one is the black sheep of the MCU, honestly. The whole continuity thing, and recasting the actor, and plus different tone that, Edward Norton wanted to go with in comparison to the studio. I honestly like this movie a lot more than most people, so let's get into it. I'm giving it 1 point for production quality. The CGI is obviously a big thing. Honestly, I don't mind bad CGI and stuff like that too much. Partially because I don't have much of an eye for spotting it, and even if it does look kind of bad, it usually doesn't detract from me liking it as much. Of course, if it does for you, that's fine. We all have our preferences. I don't mind it too much in this movie. It is kind of distracting at times. Performances are good, especially the lead role. Plot just feels a bit uninteresting, a little bit generic. 2.5 points for entertainment potential. This is probably my biggest difference to a lot of people. It tries to be an action movie centered on an important character. A few other supporting characters. Feels generic though. Not entirely perfect. I really think though that where this shines, 2.5 points for source material adaptation. If there's one thing about the MCU in general that I don't like, and a lot of other people have pointed out, the characterization of Bruce Banner Hulk is not very good. Comics Hulk and Bruce Banner are just so more interesting, and it just kind of falls flat for a lot of the projects. This movie, though, it gets as close to it as possible, and I love that. It's really good as a Hulk origin story. It captures a huge part about the character, and it nails the relationship between Bruce Banner and the Hulk, because those are two separate entities with two separate sets of goals and what they want. And I really like it, at least for me. Half a point for objective metrics. It's the lowest grossing film of the MCU. It's been very overlooked. The other ones stand out more. This one's honestly a little bit of. I think people overlook it just because, it isn't quite as big of a success, but this isn't quite as matter as much. Giving it 1.5 points for overall quality and personal enjoyment. I really enjoy it more than most. I see the cracks it has. It feels good overall. Could have lived up to its possible heights a little bit more, and I'm giving it green flaws. How fitting. Doesn't quite feel as bad as the reputation would suggest, but the problems are there. I just don't dislike it as much as most people do. I especially like the inclusion of Thunderbolt Ross and the leader, who are both, well, there's a theory that Red Hulk is going to show up in Thunderbolts, played by Harrison Ford, since William Hurt passed away, rest in peace. And the leader is going to be the villain in Captain America 4. Some nice continuity lookbacks, and yeah, this one's getting involved. So 8 out of 10, green flaws. Next up, Iron Man 2. Definitely the least liked of Phase 1 for a lot of people. For me, yeah. Giving it 1 point for production quality. It just does not do enough to stand out. It honestly just does not stand out as much as it could have. Iron Man 1, like I said, amazing, stands out. Iron Man 3, later on, first movie of Phase 2, it does some stuff to stand out. Obviously not as much as the first one, especially in the wake of Avengers. But Iron Man 2 just doesn't feel like it stands out very much. I really like Sam Rockwell's portrayal of Justin Hammer. He's freaking hilarious. And what's his name? Who plays Whiplash? Who plays Whiplash in Iron Man 2? I should know this. Who is it? Mickey Rourke. I like him as Whiplash. Whiplash in the movie does not feel very interesting. Feels like there should have been more of him. This movie just doesn't stand out as much. Giving it 2 points for entertainment potential. Sequel to Iron Man. Iron Man's good in it. War Machine's good in it. It's just very meh. 2.5 points for the adaptation of the source material. It actually does get a good bit of the central relationship between Iron Man and War Machine, and also Whiplash with his history and his relationship with his dad. This did begin the trend, or at least I think follow the trend of a lot of MCU villains being inspired by some kind of bad thing happening to them relating to Tony Stark. And here, it's not too bad. I like the inclusion of Black Widow in this movie, introducing her. I think it introduced her well, at least at the time. 1 point for objective metrics. It did well, just doesn't stand out. 1 point for overall quality and personal enjoyment. Here's where I'm going to lay into this movie. It is not memorable as much. Honestly, it just is not as memorable. The action in it is okay. The suit-up scene where he puts on the portable suit, the one that he carries around as a briefcase, awesome. Him fighting Whiplash there in the racing arena, and Whiplash uses his whips and cuts the car, good. The non-action stuff is alright, but the final battle, it was very lame. Yeah, drones can be pretty entertaining at times, just not here. We needed more of Whiplash. He needed to be a bigger character. This movie just needed to do more to stand out. And I'm giving it a grade of yellow flaws. Feels very generic. Like I said, I might be repeating myself. It just does not stand out from the absolute beast and incredible movie that was Iron Man 1. So that means Iron Man 2, 7.5 out of 10, yellow. You might be a little surprised to see 7.5 have it be that high, but that's just because my rating system is a little bit weird. The yellow flaws there should really tell you a little bit more about what I actually think of this movie. Now, moving on to Thor. This one is better than Iron Man 2, better than The Incredible Hulk, not by much. They're actually pretty close. Thor Ragnarok is definitely the best Thor movie. Giving it 1 point for production quality. I don't know, it just doesn't stand out to me personally. I like the performances. I like the whole fish out of water thing that, it does it pretty well. And it obviously introduced Loki, and Loki is an awesome character in the MCU. It's just, I think this ties into several other of the criteria here. So I'm giving it 2.5 points for entertainment potential and 1.5 points for source material adaptation. All three of these categories I'm going to talk about right now. The fish out of water thing is interesting, and I think they pull it off well. But this movie feels. Bear with me for a minute, this may be slightly convoluted. Feels a little bit more like a movie adapting a comic book than it does a comic book movie. I'm not sure if that is entirely obvious to exactly what I mean. It feels like this is a movie that looks at the comic inspiration and says, oh, we're gonna take some of this and just do it over here in a different form, rather than saying, we're gonna take this and put it strongly over here. It feels like a lot more of the source material could have been preserved, and sometimes I feel like that dampers this movie's ability to be really, really great. Thor's characterization is different, has him going from, the whole spoiled and kind of just partying and not really understanding much type of character to an actual warrior. I like the journey. I like the personal discovery of it. Him giving himself up to the Destroyer near the end of the movie feels pretty nice. It just feels like this could have done more. I actually quite like Thor in the comics. I like a lot of stuff Thor does in the comics. Honestly, for me, this movie just needed to be closer to that. And I don't mind it. I don't mind this movie too much. I just think it could have done more. Giving it 1 point for objective metrics, is a success. Not quite as big of a success as, some of the other movies in Phase 1, Iron Man and Avengers especially. It was a success, though. 2 points for overall quality, personal enjoyment. Still giving it full marks here because I enjoy it. It's fun. Just feels like it could stand out a little bit more. Kind of like Iron Man 2, honestly. And I'm giving it green flaws, some issues, still manages to be quite enjoyable, especially the performances. Chris Hemsworth as Thor, especially, and Tom Hiddleston as Loki, legendary. That's more for Avengers, but still really good. So that gives Thor 8 out of 10, green. Moving on to Captain America, the First Avenger, giving it 1.5 points for production quality. They nail the whole feel of the 1940s period. And that's honestly a really good thing about this movie, because it gives you a nice point of contrast to everything else in the phase, being very modern. And this movie really nails the feeling of the mid-20th century. And it was during a time of war. The whole military field was important. Giving it 2.5 points for entertainment potential. Pretty good Captain America origin story, which also giving it 2.5 points for source material adaptation. That one part just could have been done a little better, because honestly, Red Skull could have been more menacing. That's my one major, gripe about this movie. But other than that, Captain America as a character is perfectly captured by this movie. Just the essence of who Captain America is, who he is meant to be, they get it to a T in this movie. It's amazing. Because honestly, outside of Captain America's, first role in real life in the 1940s, being a mascot for, America, we're gonna go fight the bad guys over there in Europe. Outside of that, Captain America was kind of sort of like Iron Man, a little bit of a B-list character before modern times, and this movie made Captain America so interesting. His relationship with Bucky, his relationship with Peggy Carter, the entire fact that Red Skull, who's a Nazi, is getting beat up in a hero fashion by the same blonde-haired, blue-eyed superhuman that he thinks people should be. Really good. Screw Red Skull. Nazis are bad. Captain America's cool. This movie made Captain America cool. Giving it 1 point for objective metrics, pretty good success. 2 points overall quality, personal enjoyment. It is a little bit simple, and we know Captain America has to get to modern times, so the whole ending thing is a little bit predictable. But honestly, doesn't really dampen this movie for me. Giving it blue flaws because Captain America's characterization and what this movie managed to do for the character makes up for the simplicity, honestly. So I'm giving it 9.5 out of 10 and blue. Alrighty, going to the big one. Last movie of Phase 1. Marvel's The Avengers. This movie is still very good. Still awesome. It is up there for a lot of people. It is up there for me. Not quite perfect, but it is still awesome. I love this movie. This is the one movie that I think, regardless of when, I can always rewatch it. Sometimes, stuff like Infinity War, Spider-Man No Way Home, even though those are a lot more recent, those feel quite a bit more heavy to me, a little bit more emotionally down sometimes. Sometimes I prefer that, but I prefer this more. This movie is the highlight of Phase 1, besides Iron Man, obviously. This movie is just so cool. It was the big team up. Taking that fairly niche concept that hadn't been done in live action much before and making it interesting. We had teams that existed before. We have, obviously, X-Men, Fantastic Four, also for Marvel. This made the Avengers mainstream. This managed to make the Avengers up there with the legendary status of the Justice League from DC. This movie is just awesome. I'm giving it 1.5 points for production quality. The scale of the sets and the camera work is so impressive. The performances, top notch. They really give us a sense of the unique characterization of the characters and how they all bounce off each other. And the story makes sense. It stays consistent, and it's just so awesome. I love this movie. It's so good. 3 points for entertainment potential. It's meant to be a movie where important figures are brought together for a greater purpose. If you're familiar with, Nick Fury bringing up the Avengers initiative and some of the trailers and stuff for Infinity War talking about it, there was an idea to bring together a group of remarkable people to see if they could become something more. And when we needed them, they can fight the battles that we never could. That's awesome. And that's exactly what this movie does. They're fighting for something greater than themselves, and it succeeds so well. And it just has so much potential, and it lives up to that potential. 2 points for adaptation of the source material, because it feels like a little bit in this movie, some of the characters could have gotten a little bit more time to exist on their own, rather than the way they did it. Some of the characters do feel a tad bit less developed. The issues with, the soft reboot of Hulk being recast by Mark Ruffalo instead of Edward Norton. And honestly, Hawkeye could have felt a bit more fleshed out. He had a very brief appearance in Thor, although this movie did do a lot for Hawkeye. Black Widow could have been fleshed out a little bit more after Iron Man 2, maybe. But like I said, this movie did a lot for her as well. 1 point for objective metrics, because this is the highest grossing movie of 2012. It's, right now, currently the 9th highest grossing film of all time, peaked at number 3, closer to its release, and this arguably cemented the MCU and Marvel in general as a massive cultural force, because before the MCU, DC was dominating a lot, and now Marvel is just as big, if not bigger. Giving it 2 points for overall quality and personal enjoyment. It succeeds as a team-up movie, stands out in my memory. It's an early gem of the franchise, and it doesn't lose its rewatch value. It manages to keep me engaged every time. Giving it green flaws, because Hulk, a little odd sometimes. And there's one thing I haven't brought up yet. Joss Whedon, in this movie, hates Captain America. I already don't like Joss Whedon too much. Justice League 2017, meh. Avengers Age of Ultron, meh. Not that I don't like him as a person, I don't know pretty much anything about him. I think his other stuff his other contributions to you know, the MCU have been kind of eh. I mean, I know he's done some writing for Marvel Comics, and that's been pretty good. But Captain America is an out of touch old man in this movie. That's the one thing that some really gets me on rewatch. Yeah, he's important and still does a lot, but he's a bit of an out of touch old man. Yeah, I get that's. The heck was that? Sorry about that. Should. Well, my windows are closed. sorry about that. Captain America could have been done better. That is part of the character. It just didn't need to be there quite as much. But still, like I said, this movie rocks. So now my overall thoughts on Phase 1. The overarching theme of this phase was to create and unite the Avengers. It does that. It's a massive, incredible jumping off point for everything that came after it. Still stands on its own as a phase independently. Everything could have stopped after the Avengers, and that shows just how awesome Phase 1 is. So my rating for Captain America was a 9.5. My rating for Thor was an 8. My rating for Iron Man 2 was 7.5. 8 for The Incredible Hulk. 10 for Iron Man. 9.5 for the Avengers. Meaning, on average, Phase 1, 8.8 out of 10 green flaws. This phase still stands out and is so cool and so awesome after all this time. And that is exactly what it should do. This is still one of the greatest collections of live-action movies that has ever been made. Especially for the superhero genre. Especially for sci-fi and fantasy. And just this whole area of fiction. It's incredible. It still is so cool and has so much appeal, even in its low points, which still do manage to be entertaining. And honestly, that's everything I've got to say. It feels like I'm just honestly repeating myself because really, when I think about this overall, the highs are so incredible that honestly I can't think of a lot of the huge bad parts. It's that good. So anyways, thank you for watching. I am going to be releasing my reviews on Phase 2 and, Phase 3 further down the line. Expect more videos. Probably, maybe my top movies, maybe SCP, I don't know. One of those is going to be next, but thank you for watching this. Let me know your thoughts if you're interested. I really like, delivering my thoughts in this way. I like this formula. This is what I'm going to stick with. And yeah, again, thank you for watching. So this has been Tom of the Orange Jungle Street Sheep. I hope you have a good day. Goodbye.